Why do most modern buildings look bland? Some of the most iconic places in the world, the historic neighborhoods of Paris, the colorful favelas of Rio, the arched pedestrian bridges of Venice, they are notable not only for their beauty, but for their distinctiveness. Then consider most new developments today, homes, apartments, offices, and retail shops that look similar in cities around the world. Before we get into the video, do like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon. A creeping sameness is besetting the planet. Prominent New York architect and urban planner Vishen Chakrabarty argued in a talk at the TED conference Thursday, a trend he says threatens to rob cities of their individuality. To illustrate his point, he showed the 6 photos below, all of the urban developments built in the 20th century. Aside from local landmarks and the skylines, the buildings could be anywhere. Aesthetics matter to the daily lives of residents, affecting how people feel and interact with spaces. As more people move to urban areas, design takes on increasing importance. Cities, if they're going to attract people, have to be great, Chakrabarty says. The blandness sweeping the globe can be largely explained by 3 factors: mass production of building materials. The widespread availability of concrete, drywall, steel, and glass means building designers and contractors can make easy use of them, deploying them in cost-effective and mind-numbingly similar ways across the planet, Chakrabarty says. Building codes. Regulations require architects to design spaces for cars, fire prevention, and accessibility. I'm all for pedestrian safety, firefighting, and certainly wheelchair access, Chakrabarty said. But we have to acknowledge that all of these well-intentioned rules have the tremendous unintended consequence of making it illegal how we use to build cities. A fear of difference. When designing a new project, architects frequently get questions from clients. If we try that new idea, will we be sued? Will we be mocked? This leads to a better safe than sorry mentality that only adds to homogeneity. 19th century apartments were built in small buildings with an elevator, a staircase surrounding it, and about a dozen apartments. This created a sense of community. Residents knew each other because they passed them on the stairs. Such a building would be illegal to construct today. Modern buildings need fireproof stairwells and greater accessibility. Developers, confronted with the cost of installing multiple elevators and complicated internal infrastructure, need to spread the expense over more apartments, leading to bigger buildings. What that results in is the dull thud of the same apartment building being built in every city across the world, Chakrabarty says. This is not only creating physical sameness, it's creating social sameness. These buildings are more expensive to build, and it's creating an affordability crisis in cities all over the world. It's not simply a matter of changing taste that drives modern design towards a minimalist aesthetic. Modern design has been gravitating towards minimalism from the beginning of the last century, and with the beginning of this one, it seems to be reaching almost complete saturation. The reason for the prevalence of the aesthetic has nothing to do with fashion, though it may have sparked initial experimentation. Rather, it is simply the result of the designer's expression of the modern ethos, namely, its absence. Proust defines style as a quality of vision, a revelation of the private universe that each of us can see and which others cannot see. One, to share your subjective vision with others through your work is to fashion it in the style of that vision. In this way, style is not an original arrangement of lines, shapes, and colors on the screen or words on the page, but an authentic expression of your inner sight, that is, your taste and your judgment. Contrary to modern opinion, the style has nothing to do with creativity, the pointless pursuit of originality for the sake of standing out. It is, rather, the expression of the maker's subjectivity through their work. The modern world presents us with 2 problems concerning one's expression of style. The first is that in the consumer, market-oriented society, the subjective taste of the designer is not important, and may even be detrimental to the creation of consumer goods. The aesthetic of these goods is driven by the marketing-directed aesthetic of the brand, where the brand guidelines and the aesthetic must remain unassuming and restrained so that it does not compete with the message or character the branding team is trying to communicate. Simply put, design decisions outside of brand guidelines must intentionally lack style. For otherwise, the subjective style of the designer would assert itself over the style of the brand. The designer acknowledges this tacitly and gets on with solving problems. The one segment of the consumer market which allows the designer to express their style in their work is called the designer goods market. It is telling that the term used to describe this segment of the market puts it in contrast with what one would assume to be a non-designer market, that is, the general market where the designer's vision is restrained by the brand. In this designer market, the designer becomes the brand and their signature style becomes the attraction. Here, however, we run into our second problem. The designer's vision, their taste, and their judgment is not something developed in isolation, is not a product of mystical genius, not something they are born with. Vision grows from experience, and it is developed through living. The content of that experience is one's environment, one's culture, society, and civilization. Simply living in one's culture and interacting with it conditions your sight through the lens of that culture. Because the general principle of modern Western liberal culture is non-judgment, such a society shifts towards a subjective worldview in which everyone's opinion and preference carry an equal weight to your own. As we move into the 20th century, the world of design schools, that is, design styles, break down into individual styles. But while the former schools were all influenced by the ethos of their era and civilization, empire, religion, ideology, history, a modern designer finds themselves working on an empty shell, a civilization without an ethos. As a result, what directs their work is no longer a shared spirit and vision, but their creativity. Their work is no longer celebrated for how well it can communicate a vision, but for how original it is. We arrive at a postmodern design. These two problems, the problem of being unable to express oneself due to commercial constraints, and the problem of having no definite cultural ethos to develop one's vision, lead to design taking its course towards a minimalist aesthetic. This minimalist aesthetic is not itself an expression of vision, but rather it is a reaction to an absence of vision. In place of the eye, the modern designer substitutes the perfect measurements of the computer. In place of instinct and gut feeling, the designer substitutes mathematical ratios and color palettes. Design shifts from an organic activity in which emotion expresses itself in the material to an activity of measurements and adjustments. There is beauty in modern design, just like there is beauty in all instances of harmonious arrangements of parts, but there is no style, or in the rare cases there is style, it is something primal and undeveloped, a product of a creative outburst, rather than a thoughtful expression of the spirit of one's civilization. Without either the will to express themselves or without anything to express, we arrive at a world of plainly shaded squares whose only redeeming qualities are their simplicity and their mathematical perfection. Thousands of years ago, primitive craftsmen carved blocks of stone into beautiful forms. Today, we revert to the block, celebrating the clarity of its lines. Perhaps the biggest constraint in the urban U.S. apartment market, a $61 billion annual industry, is the amount of available space. Many cities zone with an overwhelming preference for detached, single-family homes with small corridors in downtowns or dense areas set aside for large, multi-story towers. In Seattle, for instance, roughly 3/4 of residential land is zoned for single-family homes. That means new apartments are forced to cluster in small areas of the city, amplifying the impact of a rash of new, similar buildings. The buildings themselves are an effort to fit within the small niches made available by local building and zoning codes. According to Mueller, due to height limits and safety/fire requirements, most of these structures are what's known as 5/1 or 1+5. Wood frame construction, which contain apartments and is known as Type 5 in the International Building Code, over a concrete base, which usually contains retail or commercial space or parking structures, known as Type 1. Some codes also mandate a modulated facade or varying exteriors across adjacent buildings to avoid repetition. Cities' design review boards can add to the pressures caused by zoning. Ideally, these groups work with architects and developers to improve upcoming buildings and make them more compatible with the neighborhood. Mueller says that's not always the case. In some cities, there's a tendency to rubber stamp structures that have already proven themselves, leading to a formulaic feel. Better design is possible by making greater use of local materials and by insisting on more creative approaches. Okay guys, that's pretty much it for this video. If you liked the video, please like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you at the next one.